Hey guys, welcome to day 7 of 100 days of code. Now, today we have a whole day dedicated to a really cool project. And what we're going to be building throughout this day is basically Hangman, or the code equivalent of this game. So the way the game works is you have to guess a word, and for every wrong letter you submit, you end up taking a life away from this little man. And of course, the longer it takes you to get to the word, the more you put your little man in danger. This is what the final completed project is going to look like. We're going to have some really cool ASCII art, like this Hangman logo up here, and it's going to ask us to guess a letter. So let's try A. And you can see that's not in the word, so we lose a life, and it starts drawing our little hangman. So let's try another letter. E. There's a lot of E's in there, so we managed to get that. Let's try a T. And I think I know what the word is now, just before my little man is going to die. I think it's beekeeper. There we go, we got it. So if we had lost just one more life, the leg would have been added and we would have lost, but we managed to get there in the end. So this is what the completed game looks like and how it plays out. And you can go over to the final URL and run the code and see it in action if you want to. But just by building this game, we're going to be able to review and test ourselves on a bunch of concepts that we've already covered, like for and while loops, or if and else statements, lists, strings, the range function, modules, and much, much more. So I hope you're as excited as I am to get started on this project. And once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's begin. Alright guys, so before we get started with our project, it's really important that we're all on the same page and we understand how the code is going to work because we know how the game works. So I recommend that if you've never heard of this game, Hangman, then before you continue to just head over to the Wikipedia article on Hangman, and it might be even easier if you select your own language because I know that it has a different name in different languages. Now, if you've never played this game, I also recommend just to go and give it a go online. So I'll link to this address, and if you click on single player untimed, you can see that you have a word that you have to guess, and then you start picking some letters, and if it's right, then it goes in, and if it's wrong, then the hangman gallows start being drawn, and our little man is at risk of being hung. Once you understand how the game works, it's time for us to examine what the logic for our program is going to look like. And to do that, we're going to use flowchart programming. So it's very simple. It just means that we can draw out a flowchart to represent the logic of our game. At this point, I want you to pause the video and have a quick think about how you would program Hangman. Try and come up with a flowchart that represents the logic of this game. Break it down into little steps. What needs to happen first? What needs to happen when the user makes a guess? And what should happen when the guess is incorrect? When should the game end? Pause the video now, take a pencil and a piece of paper, or use draw.io to create your flowchart. So how did that go? Did you break down the problem? It's really important to say that there's no single right answer here, and there's loads of ways that you could have done this. But let me show you my approach, which is how we'll write our program over the next couple of lessons. So this is what it looks like from start to end, and if we zoom in a bit, let's go through this flowchart step by step so we're all on the same page. At the start of the game, the first thing we do is to generate a random word. Let's say in this case it was the word mouse. Now the next step is to generate as many blanks as the letters in the word. So we have these blanks to show the user how many letters are in this word that they need to guess. They don't get to see this, but they get to see this. And the next step, they get to guess a letter. So let's say the user in this case guessed the letter O. Well, the next thing we have to check is the guessed letter actually in the word? Well, in this case, O is indeed in mouse. It's the one at the second position. And so we go down this path and we answer yes to that question. So now we get to replace that blank with the letter O. Now, the next stage is we have to check, are all the blanks filled? Are all of these blanks removed? Because in that case, it means the user has guessed all of the letters correctly. Well, at the moment, it's definitely a no, because we've only guessed one letter. So then we go all the way back to the beginning and we ask the user to guess another letter. Now, at some stage of the game, all the letters will be guessed, and then we can answer yes to this question, which means it's game over. The user has won because they've guessed all the letters correctly. Now, if we go back to the part where we asked the user to guess a letter, and they guessed a letter, say the letter Z, which doesn't actually exist in this word mouse, well then in this case we go down this right path to answer no, and the user loses a life, which means we start drawing out our hangman figure. Now, depending on whether if they have run out of lives, if the hangman has been drawn completely, then they would go down this path, but at the moment they've only lost one life and this figure is not complete, so the answer is no. And that means we go back to the beginning and we get them to guess the next letter. Now, if at the stage where they've exhausted all of their lives and the hangman figure is complete, well then it's the end of the game and they've basically just lost without having guessed all of the letters in the word. So this is the logic, and you might need to come back to this video a few times if you get stuck along the way, just to review how the program flows, but it might also be worth creating your own flowchart or simply downloading this completed flowchart I have here in the course resources. It's a really useful tool to come back to and refer to as you're writing the code, because this will give you an overview of what you're trying to get your code to do. And hopefully this is going to make it easier for you to complete the upcoming challenges in this project. Once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started. Alright guys, so to get started, head over to the starting Replit file, which you'll be able to find in the course resources. And you should see a pretty much empty file, as well as 3 to-dos for you to complete. All I've got here is a list of 3 words, aardvark, baboon, and camel, and we're going to be choosing a random word from that list, and then we're going to ask the user to guess a letter, and then we're going to check if that letter matches one of the letters in the chosen word. So we're basically just tackling the first part of this flowchart up to about here. Once you've completed all 3 to-dos here, you should have something that will function more or less like this. So this is the end result of step 1, and it should ask us to guess a letter. So let me try A, and it shows me that this A matches with the first letter in the word as well as the 4th letter in the word. So I'm pretty sure that the word that it picked randomly was actually aardvark. Essentially, your code is going to loop through each of the letters in the chosen word and then check it against the word that the user entered and report back whether if it matched any of the letters in the word. Now, if you need a hint, then head over to the course resources and you'll see a link that's marked as hint. And once you click on it, it'll take you to this page where it talks about how to use the for loop with a list in Python. Have a read through the section and then go back, try to tackle the to-dos and see if that helps you. All right, so have a play around with the final version, and once you're ready, go ahead, fork a copy of the starting file for day 7, step 1, and tackle the to-dos one by one. Good luck. All right, so how did you get on? Now, if you got stuck or you want to see maybe how I did it, then continue watching and I'll go through the solution with you. So first things first, head over to the link and fork your own copy. Once you've done that, we're going to tackle the to-dos one by one in order. The first one asks us to randomly choose a word from the word lists and assign it to a variable called chosen word. So in order to randomly get an item out of the list, we're going to need to import the random module. And once we've got hold of that, then we can say random.choice, and if we put inside the parentheses the list that we want to randomly choose from, then we should be able to get hold of a single item from this list randomly. And then finally, we're going to assign it to a variable called chosen word. So let's call that chosen word and then set it to equal this result. So that's to do 1 completed. The next to do, we have to ask the user to guess a letter and assign their answer to a variable called guess. And finally, make that guess lowercase. In order to ask the user for anything, we're going to have to create an input. And let's say, guess a letter. And then we can assign their answer, which will replace this line of code with a variable called guess. So we'll just set that equal to guess. And finally, we're going to make this guess lowercase, and we do that by writing .lower. Now, step 3 asks us to check if the letter the user guessed, which is this guess variable, is one of the letters in the chosen word. So this randomly chosen word could be any one of these, aardvark, baboon, or camel, and we have to somehow check if this letter, which is stored inside this variable guess, matches any of the letters inside this list of words. So as I mentioned, as a hint, you can have a look at this document from Google for Education, which talks about various things in Python. And the part I wanted to draw your attention to is the for loop, which we covered previously. So we know that we can use the for loop like this to loop through a particular list and get hold of each of the items in the list like this. So in our case, all we have to do is say for letter in chosen word. So this is going to go through this chosen word letter by letter, and each time the loop runs, we'll get hold of one of the letters inside the word. So the first time that letter variable will be equal to A, the next time it'll be equal to R, and so on and so forth. So now inside our for loop, we can check to see if the letter that we're currently looking at is double equals to the letter that the user guessed. And in this case, well, then that means it's a match, right? So we're going to print either match, or in my case, I'm just going to write right, and else, namely if it doesn't match, then we're going to print wrong. That's it. That's all we had to do to complete all 3 to-dos. And now if I run this code, you can see it's going to ask me to guess a letter. So let's put A, and then it goes through this loop line by line to check against this letter that I've guessed. So I'm guessing in this case the chosen word is aardvark. So when the loop is running through the first letter, A and A match, so it says right. Then the next time it's looking at the letter R, A and R does not match, so we get wrong, and it continues until it finds all the matches and all the ones that don't match. Now, if you want to check your code against mine, simply head over to the URL that's listed in the course resources under App Brewery Day 7 Hangman 1 End. And here you'll be able to see all the code that I went through with you just now. Now, if you had any issues understanding how the code worked or how to get to the final solution, and if you're at all confused, I recommend putting the code through Thonny and just clicking on the debug to go through each of the steps one by one. So in this line, we're going to use the random module and get hold of a random item from this list. So in this case, it's picked camel. And now that camel is going to be equal to the variable chosen word. So on the next step, we ask the user to guess a letter. And once we step into that, it's going to print that out into the debug console. And if I put A and hit enter, then guess is now equal to A. And there's our second variable, guess, which is equal to a. Now we fall into our for loop, and if we step into the loop, then you can see that the chosen word is going to be replaced with camel, and letter is going to be replaced with each of the letters in the chosen word one by one. So the first time the loop runs, it's going to be C, and then it checks to see, well, if C is equal to guess, which is A, does that match? No, it doesn't. So it jumps to the else part and it prints out wrong. And then the loop is going to restart from the top, and we're going to go to the next letter in the chosen word, which is A. Now in this case, the letter is A and the guess is A, and so that should match, and so it should print right. And then it basically steps through all of these again and again until we get to the end of the word and we get this printed out. So have a play around with that and the debug console to wrap your head around it, and once you're confident that you know what's going on, then head over to the next lesson and let's complete step 2. Alright, so now that you've tackled step 1, let's continue building out our project by doing step 2. Again, we have 3 to-dos in the starting file, and what we're going to try and do here is we're going to generate a list with as many of these blanks, which is represented by an underscore string, as there are letters in the chosen word. So for example, if the chosen word was apple with 5 letters, then we should be able to create a list with 5 items and each of them being an underscore. So then in the next stage, we can replace some of the items inside that list with the correct letter if the user guesses it right. So for example, if the word was apple and the user guessed the letter P, then we should be able to loop through each of the letters in the word. And for every letter that it matches, we replace the underscore with the actual letter. So then we end up with a list that looks like this. Finally, you're going to print that out and we should be able to see it in the console. In the starting file, you'll notice I've added a little bit of testing code, which is just a print statement telling us what the chosen word is. And this will make it easier for us to debug and figure out if our code is not doing what we want it to do. So once you've completed all of the to-dos in step 2, then this is what you should get. In this case, the chosen word is baboon. So if I guess the letter B, because I'm cheating and also because I'm trying to test the code, and I hit enter, then you can see that it should print out a list with 6 items in it because there's 6 letters in baboon. And each of the letters which I've guessed correctly in the right are replaced in the list in the correct position. B occurs in the first and the third letter, so that is what's showing up in this list. And everything else is still the underscore because they're blanks and still need to be guessed. Have a play around with the final version of the code, and once you're ready, head back, fork the starting project, and complete the to-dos in order. Now, if you need a hint and you get stuck, be sure to check the course resources for a link that links to, again, a Google for Education page, and have a read through the section on the range function that we learned about in previous lessons. Remind yourself of how it works and then go back to your code and try to tackle it and see if you can get it to do what it needs to. Good luck, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, let's go ahead and run through the solution together. Firstly, I'm going to fork my own copy of the starting file for step 2, and then I'm going to take a look at to-do number 1. So the goal is to create an empty list called display, and for each letter in the chosen word, remember that's a random word from this list, we're going to add an underscore to this list called display. So it tells us that if the word was apple, then display should contain 5 underscores representing each letter the user needs to guess. Let's go ahead and just click run before doing anything first. And this print statement will execute and it'll tell us that the solution is aardvark. this is a 7-letter word. So in this case, we would need to create a list with 7 underscores and 7 items. Let's go ahead and create an empty list called display. An empty list is just a set of square brackets with nothing inside. Now for each letter in the chosen word, we're going to add a underscore to this list. How can we add something for each letter? The simplest way is to simply use a for loop. Now, in this case, we have a choice. We can either use the style of for loop that we used previously down here, which is a way of looping through a list. So we could say for letter in a chosen word. So it's going to run this for as many letters as there are in this word. And for every single letter, we're just simply going to take our list display and add an item to it. And that item is going to be the string underscore. So now if we go ahead and print out our display and see what we get. The solution is baboon, which is 6 letters, and display gets printed with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 underscores inside. Now notice how here we're not actually using this variable letter that gets created. We're looping through every letter in the chosen word, but we're not doing anything with each of the letters. So we can, in fact, just replace it with an underscore. Now, alternatively, we could have created this for loop with a range function as well. And remember that the range function creates a range of numbers from 0 up to a particular number that you specify. So we could have also, instead of looping through the chosen word, used range, and inside here we could have put the length of the chosen word. So then our range would be between 0 and the length of the chosen word. So if it was baboon, then that would be from 0 to 6, but not including 6. Remember, that's how the range operator works. So it would be 0, and then it would be 1, and so on and so forth until it gets to 5. And so that would be a total of 6 loops, adding 6 of these underscores. So given that I've updated this for loop, if we run it again, you can see it's exactly the same. It will create as many underscores in the list as there are letters in the chosen word. So it doesn't actually matter in this case which version you went for. Either this version of the for loop using the range function or the previous one which just looped through the list. It's your choice. They both work the same. So now let's move on to do number 2. Now we have to loop through each position in the chosen word, and if the letter at that position matches the letter the user guessed, then we're going to reveal that letter in the display at that position. So basically we're going to replace the underscore with the letter that the user guessed if they guessed it right. So now this is probably the hardest part of this whole step, because in order to do this, we actually have to change this for loop to one that uses the range function, because we need to get hold of the position when the letter and the guess actually matched. That way we can tap into the list and change only the item at that particular position. So let me show you how the code would look. Instead of saying for letter in chosen word, we would say for position in range, and the range is going to be between 0 and the length of the chosen word. And once we've got that, then the for loop is going to run for as many times as there are letters in the word. And for each of those letters, it's going to give us a number, a position to work with. So the first time it runs it, position is going to be equal to 0, because we'll be looking at the first item in the chosen word, which in this case would be A. And then the next time the loop runs, position becomes 1, and we'll be looking at the second item in the list. Now we no longer have that letter to work with, which is why we get an error here. So how can we get hold of the current letter in the chosen word, given that we know the position? Well, it would be as simple as saying letter equals chosen word, square brackets at the current position. Now we can check to see if the letter is equal to the letter the user guessed, then we can get hold of our display and get the item at the current position and then set that to equal the letter. And we can get rid of the else statement entirely. So now notice that we're using the length of the chosen word in quite a few places. So if you want to, you can actually simplify the code by simply creating a new variable called word length. And now every time we need to use the word length, we can just refer to that variable, which should make our code a little bit easier to read. Finally, all we have to do for step 3 is just to print our list, which is called display. And then when we run our code, you should be able to see that if the solution was camel, initially our display starts out with 5 blanks because there's 5 letters. And then once we've guessed a letter, then it will replace that letter at the correct position in that display list. So A only matches the second letter, so that second blank gets replaced by this letter. And again, I recommend to review the code if it's at all confusing or if you didn't manage to get it first time through the Thonny IDE, just to see it step by step and see what's actually happening. We've chosen our random word, which in this case turns out to be camel, and once we get into our display, it starts out as an empty list, but as soon as we calculate the word length, then we can go ahead and loop through the range of numbers from 0 to the length of the word, which is 5, and it will run the code in the for loop, which is just to add the underscore to this list 5 times. And finally, once it's done, it's going to print it out. So this is what we get, 5 blanks for the word camel. Now it asks the user for a guess. So I'm going to guess the letter A, and it enters this final for loop. This is where it's really interesting. So we're going to step into it to see it in more detail. So now the range is a range between 0 and the word length. So the word length is 5. So that range becomes from 0 to 5, not including 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is going to make the for loop run 5 times. The position starts out with 0. And when position is 0, then it's going to go into this next line, line 18, and put 0 here as the position. And then we go into the chosen word, which is camel, and pick out the item at position 0. And so this letter becomes equal to the letter C, because that's the letter at position 0 of the word. So now in our if statement, we check to see if the letter, which is C, is equal to the guess, which is A. Well, in this case, C does not equal A. So we go back to the beginning of the for loop, and we go to the next number in the range, which is now 1. And we're going to repeat this again and again. But in this case, notice that the letter at position 1 of camel is equal to A. So now letter is equal to A and guess is equal to A. So if those two are equal, then this if statement is true, and we end up going inside it to carry out this functionality. Our letter is equal to A, and we're going to look at our list, which is called display, this one, and we're going to replace that second character with the letter that was matching. And it's going to do this again and again until we've looped through 5 times through all of the letters in the chosen word, and finally we print the final version of display with the correct letters replaced. Have a play around with this if you're at all confused, and it might be that you need to look up some stuff on Stack Overflow, or you might need to review some of the lessons that we've done before on things like range functions and for loops, just so that you're really certain that you know what's going on, and only then should you continue to the next step. take a moment with this and I'll see you on the next lesson. All right, so up till now, our game is not actually particularly fun. And it's because we haven't enabled the repeatability. So we need our game to allow the user to guess the next letter and the next letter and keep going until they either die or they get to the solution. So in this case, the solution is aardvark. So I'm going to guess a letter, A, and that gets replaced in the correct positions. And now I'm allowed to guess again. And I'm going to keep going until I've filled out all of the characters. So I'm almost there, just need a K now, and we should complete the entire game. And it tells me that it's complete and that I've won, and the game finally ends and exits out of the loop. In order to achieve this and make our game more like a game, we have just one to do. Now, the idea here is you're going to use a while loop to let the user guess again after they've guessed before. Now, the loop should only stop once the user has guessed all of the letters in the chosen word, and this means that the display list should have no more blanks in it. And then at that point, you can tell them that they've won. Now, in order to do this, and as a quick hint, you might need to have a read of, again, this section which I'll link to in the course resources. And specifically, I want you to focus on this in keyword because we mentioned it previously in the course only briefly. So I want you to read through this part and see how that works because you'll need it in order to get this to work. Now, the other thing to remember is that you have the negation in Python. So you can say if something is not true, and then to do something or other. So the not is the negation, and this basically flips whatever is here. So it could be A equals 3 if not A greater than 1. So in this case, A is 3, 3 is greater than 1, so this becomes true. But because there's a not in front of it, then this entire thing becomes false. And so this if statement won't be carried out in this case. But if this was 0 and 0 is not greater than 1, so this is now false, and not false becomes true, and now this if statement will be carried out. So that's how you use the negation. And finally, you might need to remind yourself of what we learned in yesterday's lessons and how the while loop works. Essentially, you want to be able to get this part to repeat itself again and again and again until all the blanks in the display is gone and they're filled. And at that point, the user has won. And remember, you don't have to worry about punishing the user for wrong answers just yet. We're going to do that in the next step. But for now, focus on this one to do and see if you can solve this challenge. All right, so let's go through the solution together. Now, we know that the part that we need repeating is this part, where we ask the user to guess a letter again and again until they filled out all the blanks in this display. The first step is to wrap a while loop around this block of code. So we can select the entire block of code and you can either indent it individually or just select all of it and hit Command and the right square bracket. And that will shift everything by one indentation level, and that effectively puts it inside our while loop. So now we have to define our while loop. So while something is true or while something is false, repeat this code again and again. So what exactly is our condition? We know that we only want our loop to end once there are no more blanks contained inside the list called display. Why don't we create a variable which we'll call end of game and set that to false to begin with because it's not yet the end of the game. And while it's not yet at the end of game, so while this is false, so you can either say while end of game is equal to false, or alternatively, and I think slightly easier to read, is you could say while it's not at the end of the game, then repeat this continuously. Now, if we were to run our code right now, it would actually loop on until forever. It would not stop, because nowhere in our code do we actually flip the switch and change this to true. So when is it actually the end of the game? Well, it's when display has no more blanks. So why don't we check at the very end, after we've printed the display, to see if blanks are not in display. So remember, this in keyword comes from Python, and it basically allows us to check to see if a particular element exists inside a particular list. So in this case, we're checking if curly exists in list, and there it is. I can see it as one of the elements. So this is going to be true. Now, if blank in list is no longer true, well, that means that we've gotten rid of all the blanks and we replace them with letters that the user has guessed. So now this is the condition for the user having won. So we can flip the end of game to true, and this will mean that this is the last time our while loop is going to run, and we're going to print you win. That's it. That's all we needed to do. And if it's helpful, you can again take this code, put it into Thonny, and run through it using the debug step by step to see what it's doing. Now, the important thing here is to realize that while statements require some sort of change to happen inside the while loop that changes the condition that the while loop is dependent upon, and it means that the code exits the while loop. So in this case, it's when there are no longer any more blanks inside the display list. But in later steps, we're going to change that so that when the users run out of lives, then it's also going to be the end of the game and they will have lost. So take a moment, review this lesson, make sure you understand everything that's going on, then head over to the next lesson and we'll tackle the next step. Well done for getting to step 4. Now, in this step, when you take a look at the starting file, you'll see that I've incorporated a bunch of ASCII art, so art that's created using strokes of the keyboard. And you can see that this represents the stages of our Hangman game, starting from where they have all 6 lives and then going down in lives until they have no more lives, where the Hangman character is complete. This has been included as a list, and inside the list, each of these pieces of art is a single string. So we're going to be printing it out in this step, and we're going to be using it to give the user feedback. So the to-dos for step 4 include creating a variable called lives to keep track of the number of lives, and lives should be equal to 6. Now in the next to-do, we're checking to see if the guess is actually not a letter in the chosen word. Then we're going to reduce that variable lives by 1. So eventually it's going to step down all the way to 0, and when that happens, the game should stop and it should print you lose. Now this part is really important because we want the game to stop when the lives has gone down to 0. So the code should exit the while loop and print you lose. So in addition to winning as a condition to ending the game, losing is also a condition for ending the game. Now the final to do is just to print the ASCII art from stages, which is this list up here, and the stage should represent the current number of lives the user has remaining. So this way, when we actually play the game and we get all the letters wrong, each time a new piece of the Hangman is going to be drawn until eventually we end up with the entire drawing complete and the game ends and it tells us that we lost. If it's helpful, refer to the flowchart, and once you're ready, go ahead and fork this starting code and tackle the to-dos one by one. Good luck, and I'll see you on the other side. Alright, so make sure you've given it a good go before you come over here because I'm about to reveal the solution. In terms of step 4, here I've got a forked copy of the code, and if I scroll down to to-do number 1, this is pretty simple. It just tells us to create a new variable called lives, and this variable is going to be the one that's going to keep track of the number of lives the user has left. And to start off, it's going to be equal to 6. Now we move on to to-do number 2, and it tells us that if the guess is not a letter in the chosen word, then we have to reduce the number of lives by 1. Now, it might be really tempting to put this as an else statement here, because if the letter is equal to guess, then, well, obviously it matches. Well, then else, that means it doesn't match. But check out what happens here if I just print a simple statement. So now if I hit run, and we take a look on the right side, you can see that if I guess A, then you can see that we get no match printed 5 times. And that should show you that this is actually not where we want to write the code for to-do number 2. Because remember, to-do number 2 says if the guessed letter is not a letter in the chosen word, then we should reduce the lives by 1. But actually, in fact, what's happening here is it's looping through the entire word length, and for each of the letters in that chosen word, if the letter doesn't match the guess, then it's going to trigger this else statement. This is not what we want, because in this case, A does in fact match a letter in the word baboon, but we're getting no match being called 5 times. So instead, we want to write it outside of the for loop, so at the same indentation level. And the hint is that the to-do is actually at the same level as where your answer code needs to go. So here, we're going to write an if statement, and we're going to check if the guess is not in the chosen word. And basically, this does a separate check. It goes through this entire word and checks if the guessed letter exists in there at all. And if this is true, then we're going to reduce the number of lives by 1. So minus equals 1. Now, if at this stage, after we've taken a life away and the number of lives goes down to 0, well, then the game should stop and it should print you lose. So let's add another if statement in here that checks whether if the number of lives is equals to, double equal to 0. And if this is the case, then we should exit the game. And remember, to do that, we need to exit the while loop. And the while loop is dependent on this variable end of game, which starts out being false. And when we want to exit the game, when it is in fact the end of the game, we switch it to true. Like, for example, in this case, when the user has won. So here, when the lives is equal to 0, we can say end of game equals true. And we're going to print you lose. So that's all that's needed to tackle to-do number 2. So now let's run our code again. And you can see that if I keep guessing the wrong letter 6 times, then eventually I exit out of my while loop. You can see my prompt showing up again. And this means that we've now come out of the game and it's told us that we've lost. So now all we have to do is tackle to-do number 3. We have to print the ASCII art from the list called stages that corresponds to the current number of lives the user has remaining. Now, luckily for you, I've arranged each of these pictures in descending order of lives. So when you have a full 6 lives, the image at index 6 is the starting image. And when you have no lives, so the image at index 0 is the one where the hangman is fully drawn. So all we have to do down here is to simply just print the stages and corresponding to the current number of lives. So we put lives inside the square brackets. And now if we run the code again and we keep guessing, you can see that we're going through our hangman picture until we are fully drawn and we lose, and it's the end of the game. Have a quick review of the solution And if you want to see this code that I've written, then as always, head over to the course resources and you'll find a link to day 7, Hangman 4 end. And you'll be able to see all the code that I've written in there, including helpful things like a print statement that you can activate, which just shows you the current position, the current letter, and the letter that's being guessed. So you can see as the loop is going on what's actually happening. And it'll make it easier for you to debug any problems in your code. So if you had any problems in the code that you wrote, this is a really useful line to be able to help you debug what's gone wrong. Hopefully you managed to do this okay, and once you've had a quick review and you're happy with everything that's been covered in this lesson, then head over to the next lesson and we're going to complete the final step, step 5 of our Hangman project. Hey, well done for getting to the final step of the Hangman project. Now in step 5, we're going to complete the project by improving the user experience of our game. Pretty much up until now, we've already got the game functioning, but we were working with just 3 words, right? Aardvark, baboon, and camel. And at some point, the game gets pretty tiring when you're only guessing these 3 words. And in fact, the words were chosen so that if you see 7 characters and you know it's aardvark, 6 is baboon, 5 is camel, to make it easier for you to debug the code as you're creating it. And very often when we're writing code, it's really, really important to help yourself when you're creating the code. And only once you've got all the logic down and everything's working as expected, then to actually add the full functionality. So inside the step 5 starting code, if you take a look at the files over here, you'll notice 2 extra files. One is hangman_art.py, and here I've moved the Hangman stages and all the drawings, as well as a logo in ASCII art. So when we actually launch our game this time, then we're going to get the Hangman logo printed out like this at the beginning of the game. Now, the second file here is hangman_words, and this word list now expands on what we had before, and it's now a huge list of words assorted alphabetically, which we're going to draw upon and replace this previous very simple word list. The first to do is to update the word list to use the one from here instead of this one. So deleting this line and replacing it with that. And to do this, you might have to look up on previous lessons. We talked about how to use modules in Python and how to import different files. Now, if you get stuck on how to do that, take a look inside the course resources and there's hints that take you towards documentation on how to do this. Now, once you've tackled to-do number 1, scroll all the way down to find to-do number 2, where we're going to import the stages from Hangman Art, and this is the same thing using modules and import. To-do number 3 is to import the logo. So 1, 2, 3 are all to do with modules and import. And then once you get to to-do number 4, we're basically going to improve the user experience to let the user know that they've entered a letter that they've already guessed before. And when that happens, we're going to print the letter and just let them know. You don't have to punish them, and you don't have to take away a life, and you don't have to restart the game. It's just a gentle nudge and let them know that they've already guessed that letter. Now on to-do number 5 and the final to-do, we're going to let the user know if the letter that they guessed is not in the chosen word. So in this case, we're going to print out the letter that they guessed and let them know that it's not in the word. Just a little bit of feedback to make the game a little bit easier on the user. So once you've done all of that, then you should end up with a game that's like this. So because there's so many words, I think it's really, really important that you actually have this line of testing code to tell you what the solution actually is, so you can test all parts of your game because you know what the word actually should be. So let's guess a letter that's not in that word. Let's try A. And you can see the game tells us you guessed the letter A. That's not in the word, you lose a life. And we end up with the head already drawn in the Hangman. So now let's guess a different letter. Let's guess, say T. Then you can see that works as expected, but what if we try guessing T again? Well, then it tells us you've already guessed T, and it shows us the blanks including the T. Now, if they guess a letter that's actually not in the word, so say A, Well, in this case, they're going to lose a life because it's actually not in the word, and we're going to take away a life. So have a play around with the end version of the game, and as always, all the links are in the course resources, and once you're ready, then go ahead and fork the starting file and give this a go. Alright, so let's go through the solution together for this final step. The first step tells us to update the word list to use the word list from Hangman_words. And it's actually got exactly the same name, so we don't even have to change it all that much. But what we do have to do is to make this error go away. If you haven't already, go ahead and delete this line in your code where you've got the word list using the previous 3 words. And instead, we're going to import the Hangman_words. And now we should be able to tap into this word list by writing Hangman_words.wordlist. And this is the same way that we use the random module. So we imported the random module, and then when we needed it, we simply said random.choice. So choice is a function inside the random module, and we can access it like so. Now, if you want it to be a little bit simpler in terms of the code that you write, and you don't want to rewrite Hangman_words dot such and such, then instead of just importing Hangman words, you can actually instead write from Hangman words, import the word list. So now we can get rid of this part, and we can just use the previous code that we had on line 7. Using that, you can do the same thing for to-do number 2. From the Hangman art, you can import the stages, and that will make this error go away. And for to-do number 3, you can again say from Hangman art, import the logo. And then we can just print the logo. Now, notice how we're importing 2 different things from this same file, Hangman art. So if you didn't want to write it twice, you can, in fact, also just say from Hangman art, import logo, comma, stages. And this will import both the logo and the stages, and you'll see that there's no errors down here. If that's at all confusing, be sure to read through the documentation that I've linked to in the course resources that talks all about Python modules and importing, so you can familiarize yourself with this once more. Now on to-do 4, we're going to check to see if the user has entered a letter that they've already guessed and it's a letter that they got right. Then we're going to print the letter and let them know. To do this, we're going to check through the display, which is a list of letters that they've already guessed. And we're going to check to see if the guess is in the display list. Well, in this case, they've already guessed that letter and it's a correct one. So we're just going to print out the feedback that you've already guessed, and then we'll put in their guess letter. Now, however, if the letter is not in the chosen word, then we're going to print out the letter and let them know that you guessed this particular letter. That's not in the word. You lose a life. That's it. That's all we have to do. And if we run our app as it is now, then you can see that the solution is stymied. So if we just check against S, then that's being added. And if we get a letter wrong, then we get told that's not in the word, you lose a life, and our Hangman is being drawn out. And if we guess a correct letter that we've already guessed, like S again, then it tells us that you've already guessed that letter. Now, you can either choose to keep all of these print statements if it helps you understand what's going on, or alternatively, at this stage, it might make things a little bit confusing and you can just comment it out. Have a look at the final version by going to the course resources, where I'll link to the completed code that I've written here, and you can have a read through it and compare against yours. But essentially, this is all there is to this project, and you've now completed it in its entirety. Once you're happy with your code, go ahead and remove all the comments that are no longer useful, like all the to-dos and the testing code, because if you want to play the game for real, then that's just cheating. If you want to leave in some of the comments that lets you know what each part of the code does so that when you come back to it, it's easier to understand, then feel free to do that. But the final thing that I wanted to show you is what if you wanted to be able to clear the screen after every answer, because you can see that at some point you have to keep scrolling and it gets a little bit confusing as to which stage you're in. So one of the things that you can do is you can tap into the Replit module and you can import a function called clear. Once you've imported this clear function, then you can go ahead and add it just after the user has made their guess. So you can call it just as you would any other function now that you've imported it into this file. And when you run the code now, you can see that after every guess, it's going to clear the screen. So guess a letter, let's guess a different letter. And now that means we don't have this backlog of previous guesses and we can actually see what's going on at each stage. In the course resources, you'll also find a link to the final completed code under Day 7 Hangman Final, and feel free to modify this code to your heart's content, make it do whatever it is that you want to do, and push the boundaries of your programming skills if you want to. Well done for getting this far, and well done for tackling this challenge. Rest easy, and I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, well done for completing Day 7. Now, you've come a long way since the very beginning, and you've been here long enough to know what the drill is. You just got to keep showing up, keep doing the days. But don't worry if it takes you longer than one day to complete one of the days in the course, because you might have kids, you might have a really demanding pet, you might have a really difficult job. And in fact, I was learning iOS development while I was working as a doctor. And I had to do that after I came back from a night shift. And it just was so hard when my brain felt like mush and I was so tired. But the important thing is that you're putting in that daily repetition, that you're doing it continuously and you're not spending a long break in between each lesson, because this way the content can feel fresh in your mind when you come to it. So don't worry if each day takes you 2 or 3 days to do, just keep going. It's a whole linear calendar. It's a whole linear process. As long as you follow the order, you'll get there eventually. So keep going, take a break, and I'll see you tomorrow.